Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Great America Show. It's great to have you with us. This week, folks, we're live. We are live from a different continent that we're usually from. We're live from Africa. We're doing the show this week from Morocco, Marrakesh, Morocco, as we celebrate the Thanksgiving holiday. I want to go into real quick before we get into today's show. Some things that I think we should all be thankful for, and some things that I'm thankful for as we're on the eve of Thanksgiving, and we look to Thanksgiving tomorrow. And I hope you guys are all spending it with your family and your loved ones, and letting them know that you're thankful for them each and every day, not just because it's Thanksgiving. Thankful for a lot of folks, the over 70 million folks who went out and voted for Donald Trump, who are now changing the course of history. This is the Trump century, as the great Lou Dobbs put it. And those great voters who went out and voted for President Donald Trump, you guys are to thank for that, I guess myself included. The great Lou Dobbs, forever thankful for him. The whole Dobbs family, Debbie Dobbs, Hillary Dobbs, his daughter, great people. I'd never be where I am today without the great Lou Dobbs. Forever thankful to him. Thankful to the staff on the show, specifically my editor, Rob. Excellent man. Always on call for me whenever I need him. So I just wanted to get that out there as you guys all look to who you are thankful for this year as we look to be heading towards a new beginning with Donald Trump coming into office in January, and we're all counting down the days for that to happen. Today's show is going to be dedicated to climate change. The hoax of climate change. One of our favorite guests, Marc Morano of ClimateDepot.com, just got back from COP29 in Azerbaijan. Total laughingstock. The world's very upset with Donald Trump coming back into power. Still not being able to fathom that he will return to the White House, and the whole woke climate agenda, Green New Deal, all that nonsense is done. It's going out the window. It's going in the garbage. And new policies are to come. And now, as promised, Marc Morano is here with us. Marc, I want to get to first. You were somewhere over the last few weeks, Azerbaijan, if I could pronounce it correctly, about 3,000 miles to the east of where I currently am right now in Marrakesh, Morocco. I want to call it, I guess it was sort of a funeral from everything I've read. Tell the audience where you were, Marc, just a few weeks ago, the mood, the setting of it all.
Well, I was in Baku. Of course, no one in your listening audience, well, I should say a few, might know what in the hell Baku is, but Baku is in Azerbaijan. And I was there for a week at this COP29 United Nations Climate Summit. And I got to tell you, it was different. I had been to 21 out of the last 23 United Nations Climate Summits in person. And this includes Bali, Indonesia, Nairobi, Kenya, Argentina, Brazil, Cancun, South Africa, all over the planet, all throughout Europe, Southern Hemisphere, Northern Hemisphere, Asia, Middle East. I was in Dubai. This conference was completely different for one simple reason. The orange one, the bad orange man. His election right before this conference, such a funeral-like atmosphere. It was so bad that the head of the delegation for Azerbaijan gave an opening talk at this UN summit where he said oil was a gift from God.
Oh my
Let me tell you, the fact that he invoked God and the fact that he said oil was a gift from God set the whole conference to a frenzy. He became essentially, instead of Trump derangement syndrome, it was Azerbaijan derangement syndrome. It got so bad. Al Gore, former UN secretary generals and UN advisors, they're now calling for an overhaul of the process where countries can't participate in these conferences unless they're on board with the messaging. In other words, they want to turn these UN climate summits, which are supposed to represent 180 nations, as the consensus of the world as we fight and all come together. They want to turn it into social media where you ban anyone who's off message, which to me is like, this is the greatest thing that could happen, because then you would lose all these countries. They would lose interest and you would have less and less consensus and momentum, and they'd start to fall apart. Anyway, this conference went on. Let me just read you, and I'll stop after this. This was the UK Times summed it up, and I couldn't have done better than this. I'd been saying the same thing, but this just came out yesterday. UK Times. The UN Climate Summit was described by veteran negotiators as the worst UN climate summit they had experienced. And the reason, and I love this reason, it was before it even started, the election of climate skeptic Donald Trump held over the summit. And then it goes on, the Azerbaijan hosts an economy saturated in oil. They never committed to the summit's aims. Many of the world leaders stayed at home. Senior climate figures called for an overhaul of the entire process, proposing smaller summits, more focused, and it goes on and on. I got to tell you, I've never been to one like this. This was no energy whatsoever. The only major Western world leader was the UK Prime Minister, Starmer. Al Gore wasn't even scheduled. He was called in, I think, at the last minute, and he gave some insane speech about how everything we predicted has come true and beyond. But he was called in to give some star power. There was no Leonardo DiCaprio, no Greta Thunberg, no Harrison Ford, no Jeff Bezos, no Bill Gates, no Joe Biden, no Kamala Harris. This could be the beginning of the end of this monstrosity we know as the UN Climate Summit.
Well, we're hearing that the environmental negotiators made their final demand. What did they want? $300 billion a year from the world's
okay, now let's go back in time. 2015, the UN Paris, and I was there too, in Paris at the UN. Boy, I think that was COP 20 or something. Anyway, I don't remember the number, but that conference was when they signed the UN Paris Agreement. Well, one of the things they did was they agreed to a $100 billion climate slush fund for the developing nations. And here's the premise of this, before I talk about what happened with the money. The premise of this money is for the wealthy developed nations, Europe, Canada, US, Australia, New Zealand, to give to the poor nations so they don't make the same mistakes we do. And it's to give them money so that, because we created the climate crisis, the wealthy countries, and the poor countries have to deal with us, our mess that we created. So we're going to pay them out of a form of climate reparations. Right. Well, just so you understand what this really means, it's the United Nations directing $100 billion per year to government leaders in Africa, South America, Asia, who are best able to keep their citizens locked in poverty. In other words, you have a chance to extract oil, gas. You have a chance to increase your development. You have a chance for logging and for improving your economy. No, UN's going to pay the leaders to not allow any of that. Keep the people locked in poverty, and then the leaders can take all those billions of dollars. They can ensure their reelection. They can build sports stadiums, monuments to themselves, buy off political opponents, whatever they need to stay in power. That's the corruption angle. So at this COP29 in Baku, Azerbaijan, what they decided to do was they were calling for $1 to $2 trillion. It's like, reminds me of what's the Austin Powers?
Dr. Evil.
Well, no, 100 billion was nothing. They wanted $1 trillion, $2 trillion. They just kept going up. So that was the talk. And they actually added a twist. And this was a couple years ago, I guess, that when I was in Egypt. They had one in Egypt, Sharm el Sheikh. I called it Sharm el Shakedown, which was on the Red Sea in a resort, beautiful place. They were at that point said, well, it's not just going to be governments. They started taking a page from Jesse Jackson's old Wall Street project. They started shaking down the big corporations. And by the way, don't think the corporations are start to give into this climate slush fund. So they want a combination of government, business, but this was mostly about government. And so they finally agreed to $300 billion. Well, you can imagine, sounds like a lot of money. Every developing country, the environmental actors, they've been condemning this summit since we left, as a joke, as not fit for purpose, as the world is still going to end, the climate catastrophe continues. This was a waste of everyone's time. One UN advisor actually called the summit, quote, a meaningless ritual, unquote. And by the way, I agree. Even though it's a UN official, I completely agree with that. That's where we are with this. This was about money, as much money as they can get. And just keep in mind, all they got were pledges. And now the real issue is the Trump effect, is what I call it. He talked to Milei, whatever his name is, from Argentina, the free market, the professor who became the president. And within a couple hours of the phone call with Donald Trump, they pulled the entire 170 Argentinian delegation from the United Nations Climate Summit. The French foreign minister decided not to come because of some slight by some other country. An island nation said they're not coming because this is greenwashing and nothing gets done. And you also had Australia and other countries start to pull back. Trump effect is real. Unlike 2016, we had just started. We had just signed the UN Paris Agreement. Everyone thought Donald Trump was a kidney stone that they would just pass through their system with a lot of pain, but we'd get through it. Now, fast forward 8 years, Europe knows they've been scammed by this whole UN climate net zero, Green New Deal. They know they've been scammed on solar and wind being cheaper, solar and wind replacing fossil fuels. They know they've been scammed on EVs taking over and gas-powered cars going away. They know they've been scammed by the agricultural net zero policies, trying to restrict high-yield agriculture by limiting nitrogen fertilizer, going after meat eating with methane. And so you have Europe ready to walk. You have major countries, Australia, New Zealand. You have all of this happening. And Trump, they call it competitive disadvantage. They're not going to commit to this whole net zero agenda if the United States is saying sayonara, and this time we mean it, because Donald Trump has provisions now where he can submit this UN Paris Agreement, which led to this whole net zero Soviet-style energy, food, and freedom of movement rationing, to the Senate for ratification. And if they reject it, the whole framework for this, and it goes back to George W. Bush, then this whole process dies and the next president can't easily put us back in. They're going to have to go and actually possibly go back to the Senate, depending on legal interpretation, Supreme Court rulings and all that. But we've come a long way in 8 years, and I'm really hopeful that we can, if not put a knife through this movement. Remember, there have been 29 UN climate summits. It's hard to believe there won't be 39 and 49, given how entrenched it is. But if we can get the U.S. out and we can weaken everyone else's resolve, this is a major advantage, and that is the Trump effect.
I want to go through a few things you said there that I had to write down because there was so much that you uncovered there. First of all, we spoke about this the last time you were on the show. The notion of net zero is impossible physically, metaphorically, any way you want to look at it. It's absolutely impossible. It's absolutely stupid. It's like the term transgender. It's not possible.
Yes.
You have XX.
You know what it's like? It's like a permanent COVID lockdown. We'll just keep this going for 3 years, and we can do it, and we'll give government checks, and you'll be able to have odd, even. That's what it's like. It's like they're looking at it like that. Like it's the same mentality. We face a crisis. There's a virus. Everyone needs to stay in place. Same thing with this. We have to restructure the entire global economy, and we have to be in charge. You'll own nothing and be happy, but you won't have a climate crisis.
The other thing you mentioned was the cow flatulence. I'd love to see, Mark, I'd love to see a measure of cow flatulence versus human flatulence. And I'd almost make you a bet, Mark, that humans are probably doing more flatulence than the cows. And if it did affect any sort of CO2 levels, the humans are to blame and not the cows. That's the other thing. It's funny
you say that, because a year ago, a UK peer-reviewed journal had a study about how human breath is contributing to global warming. Not making this up. We inhale oxygen, we exhale carbon dioxide. They went on to introduce identity politics, and they said that Africans have less warming agents than Asians, and women have more warming agents in their breath than men. So women have more hot air, and apparently Asians have more hot air than Africans. They're weaponizing human breath. Where have we seen that before? Oh, hold on one second. That during COVID. And by the way, top UN official. Sorry, go ahead.
Are they telling our wives and girlfriends to stop speaking? Is that what what you were getting at there? Because I may be all ears here if that's what you're telling me.
I mean, that's basically, it's the absurdity of this. And you're right. So in terms of the cow emissions and cow farts, in 2006, I was working the U.S. Senate Environment and Public Works. The UN really went in earnest with this whole anti-meat campaign. They came out with a study claiming that cow emissions were more dangerous to the planet climate-wise than all the trains, planes, and automobiles combined. And then there have been multiple studies saying they got it wrong. The UN had to walk that back, but it's that same mentality. You have Prince Charles trying to put on, literally, and you can see the video, a face mask for cows and something on the rear end to catch the methane, to try to catch the belching on the front end and the farts on the back end. You have Bill Gates meddling with billions of dollars of research to give them a new diet so that they won't emit any, methane gases. It's all about collapsing our meat supply, collapsing the food supply with the going after high-yield agriculture, rationing food. It's about rationing energy, and it's about limiting your freedom of movement. That's why France praised for 2023, we're going to limit flights at 2.5 hours or less. You're going to be forced to take cars or buses or trains. You can't fly anymore. Only applies to commercial, not private jets.
By the way, coming down to, I travel to Europe very often for vacation and work a little bit. Coming through Europe, Mark, I see more air travel through these airports, whether it be Germany or Italy. This time I flew through Portugal, a rather small airport, but heavily trafficked. And for these folks out here in the EU who claim to be these, these big climate people, they're putting out a lot of flights. I wanted to go back to two things. The notion of spending money, spending 300, 400, whatever they want, billions, trillions of dollars. Mark, it's another one of these simple things like the net zero not being possible. If a man's cheating on his wife, you shouldn't have to pay the man to stop cheating on his wife. He should just want to stop doing it for the right. What does having to pay money to fix climate or pay other nations, what does that have to do with anything if America's putting out X amount of CO2 with their factories? They're still going to put out X amount of CO2 with the factories, whether you join the Paris Climate Accord, you want to join the damn African Paris Accord, the Australian, it doesn't matter what it is. It's still going to be what it is. Where does this money go that they're raising?
Well, it goes, okay, first of all, to leaders, and it pays governments not to develop, but it also goes for infrastructure projects. So the premise is that the Western world, the developing world can't make the same mistakes that we did. And what are those mistakes? Wealth, prosperity, technological innovation, long life, lower infant mortality, modern dentistry, etc. They're not allowed to make those mistakes. They have to leapfrog right to solar and wind, which anyone understands who follows any aspect of energy knows solar and wind can't power any economies. You can't make anything with solar and wind. In fact, it takes fossil fuels to make solar and wind and so-called renewable. It takes 500,000 pounds of materials dug up from the earth to make one Tesla, average size Tesla battery for an EV. Right. So the money goes to the governments. It goes to build infrastructure to make them climate resilient. It goes to mitigate the climate refugees that we've caused with our carbon dioxide emissions. Keep in mind, the entire premise is complete. Can I curse on this or not?
Absolutely.
Bullshit. And I'll tell you why. Because their premise is that the weather is now more extreme and it's hitting the developing world. Even the UN buried in the reports, even our national climate assessment written by Greenpeace, by environmental and climate activists here, Greenpeace and the Union of Concerned Scientists, admit that hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, wildfires, droughts are no trend or declining trends on global timescales, globally, on timescales of 30, 50, 100 years. There's no there. Now, there's a lot of computer model climate predictions of, it's a lot worse than we ever thought. Our prediction of 50 years from now is much worse than our prediction of 5 years ago. That's how they do it. So the idea is the governments need this money, the poor nations, to become climate resilient, to deal with all the problems, to leapfrog into solar and wind and blah, 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 blah.
Well, Mark, real quick.
And this was actually reported in mainstream financial publication. I think it was Financial Times. Africa is being bought up by white, wealthy Europeans. What do I mean? Wealthy Europeans looking to offset, as you mentioned, all their airline travel, their lifestyles, are buying up land in the 5 poorest African nations. Up to a fifth of the land in some of these poor countries in sub-Saharan Africa are now owned by European companies for offsets. In other words, African nations, they're getting this land on pennies on the dollar. They buy it, they set aside and say, we're not going to develop. Look, we have a forest preserve in Africa. Now we can continue to fly our private jets and fly all we want. Meanwhile, Africans can't develop their own resources and they stay locked in poverty. That's the UN agenda in a nutshell.
That makes perfect sense. I want to take a quick break here. When we come back, I want to go further into some evidence, because the Democrats always want to talk about proof and evidence, Mark. Some proof and evidence on where the money that we've already spent for the Paris Climate Accords, other various global initiatives, where it's went. And I want to see the evidence on where they've built things, where they've cut back on using fossil fuels and X, Y, and Z. I want to get to that when we come back. I also want to get back to someone who was missing at COP29 this year, and it just so happens to be the heaviest polluter on on Earth? China. They seem to never be in the picture, Mark, but yet they're the ones who are the heaviest polluters in the world, but everyone's so scared of Xi Jinping. You also mentioned to me before the show, there was an unlikely guest. For the first time, we're going to tell the audience who made their first appearance at COP29. And you guys might be surprised on who Mark was hanging out with a few weeks ago. We're coming right back with Marc Morano of Climate Depot. Stay with us, folks.
I'm excited to announce our Christmas extravaganza is finally here. Get this season's flannel sheets for as low as $59.98. They won't last long, so get them while you can. Our famous My Slippers, they haven't been on sale for over a year. Regularly $119.98, now only $59.98. Our 6-piece towel sets are back in stock with extremely limited quantities, only $29.98. With hundreds of MyPillow products, there's something for everyone on your Christmas list. Bathrobes, duvets, quilts, down comforters, and so much more. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to save on all MyPillow products. For example, flannel sheets for as low as $59.98, or our 6-piece towel sets, just $29.98. But that's not all. I'm extending our 60-day money-back guarantee until March 1st of 2025. Plus, all orders over $75 or more ship absolutely free.
We're back. We're talking with Marc Morano of Climate Depot. Mark, before we went to break, real quickly, I just want to touch on something. The money that we've already spent, the money that we've put into the Paris Climate Accords, X, Y, and Z. Can you tell me of any known evidence, any known proof where it's went to a nation that is a heavy polluter that they're now cutting back on pollution?
I'm not aware of a single developing nation that this money would have gone to. Now, there are some, they're reducing the rate. A lot of places, places like Denmark, Sweden, smaller sort of economies with a lot of potential for a lot of wind power, can do a lot of bragging about what percent of their electricity is wind power. In terms of the developing world, no, it's all up, up. In terms of global CO2 emissions, every UN treaty has had no impact on the rise of CO2. Every dollar spent, hundreds of billions, trillions, has had no impact. In fact, a simple way to look at it, and I have a chart at my website, Climate Depot, shows that we got into this mess under George H.W. Bush, Republican, in 1992 when he signed the United Nations Earth Summit Treaty down in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. From Bush to Clinton to Bush again to Obama to Trump to Biden to Trump, no matter who you voted for president, no matter what year it was, the chart of CO2 continues to go up. Yeah. So no matter how many treaties we pass, no matter how many Green New Deals, no matter how many EV mandates, no matter how much banning of fossil fuels, CO2 goes up, up, and away. There's nothing you can do to let's forget about controlling the weather in terms of controlling the climate, but you can't even control CO2. And this is the whole farce of this. And they look at it, the answer to me saying this, they'll say, well, that's because, Donald Trump pulled it out. That's because we have to double down and triple down. They look at this failure and say, that's because we need 4 times more money. We need 4 times more mandates. We need 4 times more UN regulations. That's their solution to all this. The more the plans fail, the more the planners plan.
It's like to have a meeting about a meeting. It's almost like a Kamala Harris thing, a meeting about what you're going to meet about. And when you meet, you're going to meet again. And it just kicks the can down the road. It's
one other quick point on this. Right before this conference, November 12th, World Bank, this is from an internal audit by their inspector general, $41 billion in climate funds have gone missing. 40% of all dispersed climate funds can't be accounted for, yet climate activists are demanding $5 trillion in annual financing. This was an article. This made the mainstream media. This is the World Bank, which is all part of this climate development fund. 40% of the money gone unaccounted for. So you
Mark,
think there may be corruption and graft in this?
Well, you go look at the Pentagon. They failed now. I think they're 8th straight audit in a row. So it may be the same accounting firm.
And by the way, kudos to Jon Stewart. I don't know if you showed that clip on your show at all, but
I haven't.
Interview with the Pentagon, but phenomenal. I was really impressed with Jon Stewart in that. He held her account.
Yeah. But it's like the same accounting firms that's managing.
Yes.
I want to turn to, before we get to that unlikely guest that you were hanging out with at that summit, China. Mark, obviously China is the biggest polluter of all time. They don't have care. They have no regard for anything. You go look at the ozone burning through the atmosphere, and there's just a big gaping black hole over China, bigger than America. Yet somehow America's always the forefront. They're always the ones who have to sign and meet and have another meeting and all that nonsense and bullshit. Yet China never anywhere to be found. Everyone's terrified of Xi Jinping. Everyone's terrified to tell Xi Jinping. We now find out that China, Xi Jinping is told empowering Pacific Island countries that they have to tackle climate change. How does China continue to skate by and skate by and skate by when they're the biggest polluters in the world, the biggest cheaters in the world, and nobody says boo?
They're the biggest by far. I think 50% of the coal production alone is in China. And they're building about a plant every 1 to 2 weeks, a new coal plant. Okay. They've been classified by the United Nations and all these climate treaties as a developing nation. Now they're like an emerging nation. There's still no mandate that they have to pay into this climate slush fund, but they can now contribute, and they're encouraged to contribute because their economy is so big and because they're so, all this economic growth. China gets away with this because they build solar plants and they build windmills. And there's actually cities in China where all these things are rotting away and rusting away. Right. They don't even use it, but they claim we're building this much capacity. Well, we have this much capacity on solar. Is it usable? Is it providing electricity? Is it doing anything? If so, why are you building all the fossil fuels? It's a virtue signal. The West loves it. When John Kerry was a climate envoy, he would go to China and be like so praising of their efforts and their sincerity. It goes back to Donald Trump's 2013 tweet that the concept of global warming was invented to make the Chinese globally economic dominant. I'm paraphrasing. Yeah. And that's exactly what this means. Everything at these summits, there's a reason Xi Jinping doesn't have to show up in person. Why? Because Joe Biden, Barack Obama, all the Western European leaders, they all are doing China's bidding. China doesn't need to be there. They're helping China. So basically what happens is this entire agenda, let's take the EVs as an example. Every automaker got sucked into this, and the idea of, this is great, we're going to work with the government, corporate government collusion, from Audi to BMW to Mercedes to Chrysler, Ford, you name it. And it was a complete, utter disaster. Sales have tanked. They can't make sales. They still are begging Donald Trump not to remove it because they get so many tax credits, benefits, subsidies. They ultimately don't care. But what it all means, to make this short story, is that China is going to be the sole global dominant automaker in the world if we continue the bans on gas-powered car and keep pushing these EV mandates. China's about to take over the world, and they're going to gut every name you've ever heard of in an automobile. It's going to be China. This is complete, utter insanity. We're not only allowing China, this has nothing to do with protectionism, tariffs, and this is like saying, hey, we're going to hand everything over to you because you're going to save the planet. And what they've done, a simple way of looking at the whole green agenda and net zero, all the Western nations with the best human rights records, the best technological innovation, and the best environmental standards are shutting themselves down with fossil fuels while farming it out to the Middle East, Venezuela, India, China, countries that have the lowest standards, in many cases, human rights, definitely environmental, and definitely less technology to be efficient and less polluting air, whether you're not CO2, but the other actual pollutants. And so all we're doing is increasing the rate of CO2 by this. None of it makes sense. And just one last point on this. If we actually faced a climate emergency, climate crisis, let's say that wasn't in dispute, you would do the freaking opposite of everything that they preach at UN climate summits, at the Green New Deal, with net zero, everything you've heard Al Gore. It would be the exact opposite. You would want economic growth, free markets, technology, innovation, and you'd want it fast, and you would want it. The wealthiest nations would do well. How do we know this? Because the United States has led the world in reducing CO2 emissions for one simple reason. We invented hydraulic fracking, or we mastered it. We improved upon it. Fracking, horizontal drilling, which then natural gas replaced coal in the United States, led the world under Donald Trump, reducing carbon dioxide emissions better than any of the people who stayed in the UN Paris Climate Agreement. So we would do the exact opposite. If we did face a climate emergency and we had to rely on the UN and net zero to save us, we'd all be doomed.
Of course, strictly hypothetical. You mentioned the tax credit that President Trump is obviously looking to revoke, the $7,500 tax credit. And I want to read something for the audience.
Automakers are begging him not to do it. But go ahead.
Well, listen to this. I want to read something to the audience. It's very interesting. And I think it goes to show you that people like Gavin Newsom love to play politics. Gavin Newsom said if the Trump administration revokes the $7,500 tax credit for EVs, then California will offer the same credit as a replacement for cars purchased in their state, with the exception, Mark, of one car maker, with the exception of Tesla. Newsom says the tax credit will not apply to purchases of Tesla because he says that the purpose of the new credit would be about, quote, creating the market conditions for more of these car makers to take the route, whatever the hell that means, rather than existing companies who have already benefited from the government. I mean, Elon Musk is the largest producer of electric cars in the world, and he's the Sir Isaac Newton of it, the Albert Einstein of it. Yet he's being punished because he's close to Donald Trump. Now, it's not just that, Mark. I want to go into something a little bit further. There was some environmentalists who were having a little bit of an issue with Elon Musk's rockets, and they wanted to put a pause on the rockets because they said that it's causing harm to the environment. We'll now find out this week that U.S. District Judge Roland Oliveira ruled that SpaceX has not been harming the environment, and his decision to protect a NASA-SpaceX collaboration as the agency seeks to return to the moon and push forward with their program. These people, Mark, will stop at absolutely nothing. And the level of crazy, it just seems to keep getting worse. I want to turn to, we've kept the audience waiting long enough here, who you were hanging out with, that unlikely guest at COP29 just a few weeks ago.
All right. Are you ready? Drum roll, please. Joe Biden, Kamala Harris didn't show up. No Western leaders, but guess, other than UK, but guess who did? For the first time ever in United Nations Climate Summit history, the Taliban leaders attended their first climate summit ever. And this was amazing because it follows years of rehabilitation of the Taliban's image. They were there at this summit. They were not barred. They were actually welcomed with open arms. And the reason they were welcomed is very simple. Beginning in 2021, when the Biden administration, left all our weapons and just pulled out in the middle of the night, the corporate media began rehabilitating the Taliban image. Newsweek in 2021 celebrated the Taliban's vow to fight terror and climate change and seek world recognition. Newsweek was part of this. Guess what? They now have world recognition as fighting climate change. CBS News, climate change didn't fuel the Taliban takeover. And then CBS News in 2021 said to fight climate change, Taliban vows to fight climate change. So on one hand, CBS News is claiming that the Taliban may be a product of climate change, but on the other hand, they're saying they're going to fight it. Well, the Washington Post did a front page story right before this conference saying isolated Taliban tackles climate crisis on its own, like they're this great force. Now, they're seen with greater respect and reverence than Donald Trump. Donald Trump would be booed at this conference if he showed up. I assure you, he'd be more than booed. The Taliban welcome with open arms. They're rehabilitating their image, which then goes to show you if Jeffrey Dahmer and any other serial killer, anyone on death row wants to rehabilitate their image, or say a prisoner, a murderer is going before a parole board, just embrace climate alarmism. You'll get positive stories. You'll get positive vibes. That's my advice now. We've seen it happen with the Taliban. They went from international pariah to celebrated guest attending their first UN climate summit.
The crazy thing about it all, Mark, is I know they're not using electric vehicles. You want to know how I know? Because we gave them all the vehicles they have, and none of them are electric, Mark. They
have U.S. tanks, aircraft, Air Force. They have every
Mark, not even
guns.
the guns are electric.
They have the best the world can buy in Afghanistan.
It makes absolutely no sense to me. I mean, it's truly troubling, Mark, that this is it's sort of laughable, but at the end of the day, it's really not, because this is serious business, Mark. I mean, trillions and trillions of dollars poured into this each and every year. Wasteful money. Now, thank God that we've got Donald Trump in for 4 years, and hopefully a Republican for another 4, and then another 4 after that. We can put an end to this once and for all. But I mean, how does this end? How do we officially get ourselves out of this laughing stock that we're in, Mark. The fact
Well,
that,
I think what's happening.
hold on real quick. What do you think Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin say when we have American scientists telling, as their scientists are developing nuclear weapons and warheads and stuff like that, our scientists are measuring the farts that are coming out of cows' asses. What do you think these people think about us, Mark?
Putin, Xi Jinping, they love this.
Yeah, of course.
They love the idea that they don't have to, they don't have to destroy us militarily or economically.
Yeah.
We'll do it ourselves.
Yeah.
And we are doing it ourselves. This is insane. Net zero, just to be clear, is Soviet-style ideology. It's the rationing of food, energy, transportation. It's that simple. And the UN's going after free speech. Al Gore at this conference it was partnered with Google, corporate government collusion, and they're monitoring tens of thousands of Google satellites are monitoring CO2 emissions all over the world, farms, factories, so they can start setting up implementation to start penalizing and fining. They want a world that is going to be Orwellian in nature, where the idea is everything's going to be based on your carbon footprint. We have MasterCard, Visa, now in conjunction with the United Nations with cards that monitor your carbon footprint, cut off your ability to spend. We have CNN proposing carbon passports for travel. Putin, if it is true, and there's all these reports that he wants to rebuild the Soviet Union, if you're Vladimir Putin and you want to rebuild the old Soviet Union, net zero is the perfect path. It is the ultimate of Soviet ideology, except it's voluntarily being imposed by the Western world.
I almost slipped up there, Mark, and said something, but you're suggesting they're plugging in things into our cars and stuff. What's next? Are they going to plug something into our mouths and our rear ends to measure our breathing? You're taking too many breaths an hour.
Well, interesting you say that. 2019, the UK fires report was really government-funded report, debated in the House of Commons. It called for regulating carbon dioxide, what humans exhale from our mouth, similar to asbestos. So think about how you handle asbestos. Again, link it to COVID.
Oh my goodness.
It's like, you have to mask up, the big moon suit, the hazmat suits and all that. That's the way. It's kind of creepy stuff. Just the last point, you asked where this goes. I think where this is heading, right before this conference, a top UN official of this conference did an article about we need to tackle climate the same way we did COVID. And they talked, and it's all about that same template. 200 medical journals said we could do the exact same thing.
Those days are over, Mark.
COVID. They want to roll climate change into a public health threat. The World Health Organization is already saying climate change is an existential threat of the 21st century. You have American Medical Association. They have doctors' climate kits. You have a doctor in Canada who actually diagnosed the first medically diagnosed patient is suffering from climate change. You have another peer-reviewed study calling for climate change to be added to the death certificate. They want climate death tolls. We are at that point where I don't think climate's going to be able to stand on its own because it's just such bullshit from beginning to end. Polar bears, you don't even hear about. Why polar bears are disappearing, but only from Al Gore's books and movies, because there's record numbers. They don't talk about polar bears anymore. They're not convenient to talk about. So what they're going to do is roll climate into a public health threat, and they're going to try to come after it that way. And it's going to be part of medical. They're already talking about limiting anesthesia to patients because of the greenhouse gas effect of anesthesia. Hospitals are talking about surgeons, when they scrub up, limiting water to lower the carbon footprint of the hospital. This is bonkers stuff. This is ideology. It's cultish type ideology.
I could tell you, Mark, I'd be willing to put every single dollar I have to my name that will never happen again. What happened during COVID, what was done to the American
I think there's
people,
enough pushback. These bureaucrats in the UN don't realize that yet, but that's where they're trying. That's their only vestige they have left. That's why they get so excited by bird. By the way, bird flu, guess what the solution to bird flu was? Massive culling of cows, sheep. Guess what the solution to climate change is? Massive culling of cows, sheep. Ireland was going to kill hundreds of thousands of cows. It's always the same solution, regardless of the crisis of the moment. And I'm going to mean this broadly: terrorism, a virus, climate. It's always the same solution: massive government government control, command and control of every aspect of your life. We live in a very scary, frightening era. My favorite Donald Trump cabinet pick may surprise you, because I interviewed the guy and he wanted to jail climate deniers in 2014, but Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Nothing says an FU to the system like RFK at Health and Human Services.
Mark, there's not an old saying. It's actually relatively new, and it's been going around. And I'm saying this in regard to any sort of Soviet style thing that they try to do again. The saying is F around and find out. And I think if the government tries to do something like that again, the American people, and they should not, and I'm not calling for any sort of government overthrowing or anything like that, I promise. But they just will not put up with it, whether it be they fight back, they don't comply, things like that of that nature. Nobody's ever going back to that again, because we know, Mark, Dr. Fauci sitting in his house laughing about us. He literally counted it with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 feet sounds good. Let's go ahead and do that. N95 masks work. N95 masks don't work. This mask worked. This one doesn't. You can wear the cloth mask, which we know is just breathing in our own gas. I mean, absolutely stupid. We have to take one more quick break here, Mark. I want to come back and talk about a story that's out this week, a big story. Biden's DOJ moved on election night to cover up an alleged solar energy scandal that cost the taxpayer hundreds of millions of dollars. We also have another interesting story out of California, Mark, and you may be surprised by this. California is wasting solar energy. They're overproducing it. Consumers are paying for it, and they do not know what to do with it. We're coming right back with Marc Morano of Climate Depot. Folks, stay with us.
Because of your overwhelming support, our $14.88 MyPillow has been one of the biggest sales in MyPillow history. I couldn't think of a better way to say thank you than to extend our wholesale pricing through Christmas. Get a classic standard MyPillow for only $14.88. Upgrade to a queen size, just $18.88. King size, only $1 more. Get my body pillows for only $29.88. And ready? Multi-use MyPillows, only $9.88. It's perfect time to stock up for Christmas gifts for everyone on your list. Go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to take advantage of our wholesale pricing, including my classic standard MyPillows, only $14.88. But that's not all. I'm so confident you're going to love our classic MyPillows that I'm going to extend my 60-day money-back guarantee until March 1st, 2025. Plus, orders over $75 ship absolutely free.
Folks, we're back with Marc Morano of Climate Depot, and I told you about an interesting DOJ story that Joe Biden was working on election night, Mark. Very interesting, I must say.
I like the fact he's working late at night. That's good. He shows he's engaged in the job.
So the Biden DOJ reportedly moved on election night to cover up an alleged solar energy scandal that cost the taxpayer millions and millions of dollars. A very interesting story here, but it was just to make it short for the audience here. It was a lawsuit that was brought on behalf of the taxpayers against the government, and the lawsuit was going to be thrown out, and then all of a sudden Biden got to work on election night. Mark, what's your take on this story, and what went on there?
It's a fact. This was broken, I believe. Breitbart News has the exclusive on it.
Yeah.
But essentially, they're hiding the fact that this $1 billion solar company that actually goes back to the Obama administration was completely failing. They're trying to prevent this lawsuit of people to try to get compensated, and they literally are keeping this in the dark. When Obama, this is called the Crescent Dunes Solar Energy Project. Almost $800 million in federal guaranteed loans with a $1 billion project. And it was in the Nevada desert, and it was supposed to do all this clean energy. And the bottom line is it's completely failed. It's gone under several times. But guess what? Just because it goes bankrupt and fails, does that mean it goes away? No. When you have trillions, and I mean trillions, of Inflation Reduction Act money on top of the tens of billions that Obama started to flow with the green energy stimulus in 2009, the money keeps going. And what we're finding, whether it's offshore wind, solar projects, Chinese EV plants, even Chrysler, you take billions, sometimes trillions of dollars from the federal government, and then you make all these promises. You're going to do a plant in some small town, good American jobs. The labor unions are happy. You close after 6 months. You take the money, the billions and the hundreds of billions, and you run. Then the same company could still exist. A new board of directors comes in, many times meet the new board, same as the old board, but they reorganize and they suck down more hundreds of millions, billions of dollars in like a federal teat, suck in the money, and then they fail again, and then they form a new corp. This is the way you pay off campaign donors. It's the way you refund billionaires their money. It's the way you do a complete scam of money. It's so bad that there's counties in California that are getting so much of this federal green money that they don't have enough bureaucrats to spend it. The money's literally piling up in the county coffers and local government coffers because they don't know how to spend it. But they'll take the money, but they can't even spend it on the projects or what it's earmarked for. This is nuts. This has to be a week one project of President-elect Donald Trump.
Yeah, speaking of, it seems far too often that we're talking about California. There's a new report out this week in the LA Times that says California is oversupplying solar energy to such an extent that it's cutting back on solar energy by 3 million megawatts per year, Mark, enough to power more than 500,000 homes. Worse off, California pays other utilities to take the excess power, which means consumers in other states are receiving credits on their bills, while Californians are struggling with the burden of subsidized green energy. Back to what I had said before, Mark, it seems like we're living in some sort of alternative reality, and people are too stupid to wake up and realize, what the hell are you doing to us?
It's been this way for a while. California has been the world leader on green energy, and they also have the highest electricity rates. They have I loved it during COVID where Gavin Newsom bragged, our economy is doing great in California. We have the most billionaires in the world. Oh, really? Well, by the way, I just came back from Azerbaijan, and let me tell you what an oligarchy looks like. Right. They had 20 city blocks, Rolls-Royce dealerships, Gucci, Armani, the most unbelievable boutiques that would have been at home at Fifth Avenue or Beverly Hills. Leave that, and you come into crumbling infrastructure, dire poverty, stray dogs, stray cats. I even ran into a stray cow. I was out running one day, a stray cow in the streets, city streets. That is what California is creating, an oligarchy. And one of the ways you create an oligarchy where you have very small number of uber rich with no middle class or rapidly shrinking middle class, and then poverty of people. That's what you get with this kind of green energy mandates that Gavin Newsom is so excited about. And by the way, you mentioned his EV mandate. Yeah. If he keeps up the tax credits and Trump removes them, it's going to make cars unbelievably expensive in California. And it's going to be a really bad deal for the California taxpayers because he wants to be the leader and fight this. I don't know. It's just the exodus from California will continue. My attitude is if you live in California, you deserve what you get.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it's at some point, Mark, people have to wake up and open up their eyes and see what's happening right before them. Californians are going to have an opportunity in their next gubernatorial election to vote either for Gavin Newsom or maybe Kamala Harris. Or
he'll win by record amount.
But right.
I mean, given up. All the good Californians, I mean, politically savvy ones have already bailed out, I believe. I think he'll win by wider margins than he has previously.
Well, I would agree with you on any other day if I didn't see some numbers this week that showed me.
So even the woke nuts are turning on Newsom. That'd be hopeful.
Well, no, it's not. It's not just them. I mean, you look at New York. The votes shifted to the right this election from 2020.
Well, that's true, actually. Which, by the way, are we ever going to talk about not you and I, because it's not my ear, but the idea of look at the 2020. Did Joe Biden really get the most votes ever? And then suddenly we're back to normal voting numbers. Like, why was 2020 so high? Could it have something to do with mail-in ballots? Can't talk about it.
Mail-in ballots. You go down the list. I want to pull up a tweet from Dan Scavino the other day, one of President Trump's confidants who's been with him since the early days as a caddy. And it's just the fact that the folks, and I'm just going to talk on this briefly, who want to forget about what happened in 2020 and the people whose lives were ruined. This is a tweet from Dan Scavino. Many people's lives were destroyed over the past 4 years since we walked out of the White House on 1/20/2021. A relentless barrage of knocks on front doors at home, served subpoenas after subpoena after subpoena after subpoena over the past 4 years. I have a lot of questions, and now that brings chills to my body because I know Dan Scavino is very close to President Trump and has his ear. But I think we're going to find out a lot of things, Mark, and hopefully what happened in 2020. I want to wrap up with something very funny and interesting. I got a clip for you guys. Mark having some fun eating at the food court over at COP 29. Take a listen.
Another report here from COP 29 in Azerbaijan. The
United Nations Climate Summit. Speakers yesterday, very prominent and high-profile speakers, talked about meat rationing and a meat tax and how the danger that agriculture and farmers were doing to the climate summit. We've even had UN reports saying that cow emissions are more damaging to the planet than the entire transportation sector, planes, trains, automobiles combined. Well, guess what? At this UN climate summit, you can see right there, they're serving beef hot dogs. They're serving burgers. I have the menus here. Meat is here, and I have not noticed any kind of meat tax additional on the food.
Hey, Mark, next time, real quickly, I want you to somehow develop a flatulence meter, and I want you to walk around and follow every single person you've seen eating a hamburger, a beef hamburger, or a pork hot dog, or a beef hot dog. I mean, the stupidity of it all, Mark.
It's really crazy. And it's, I did some other segments showing the line where they were serving meat, and the line was vegan only. The meat line was overflowing. The vegan only had 2 or 3 people in it. I mean, they won't even follow the bullshit that they preach on any level, whether it's the private jets, whether it's the meat eating, whether it's carbon footprints. They're not even capable of doing it. The fact that this conference wasn't an online conference in the age of climate change, people had to go to Baku, Azerbaijan. It was 23 hours of taxis, airports, and flying for me to get home back to Washington, D.C. That's how freaking far away Baku, Azerbaijan was. And next year is in Belém, Brazil, in the heart of the Amazon rainforest, which I'm looking forward to, if they even have one. I mean, there's a lot of serious UN people calling into question whether this is worth continuing.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't see what would be the point of it. Everyone now thinks
what's the point of it? It's the biggest party of the year the UN throws. They love it. They're not going to give that up.
Yeah, but with President Trump back now in power, it's I think we're going to see things a lot differently. Respect on the world stage is going to be a lot different. You had mentioned that clip about the food lines. We have it for the audience. I'm going to go ahead and roll it real quick.
There is a line at COP29's food court for the buffet serving meat, another buffet serving meat, and here is the vegan-only restaurant. Doesn't quite look like the same amount of interest by the UN delegation here.
Oh my! You know what? For everyone who's joining us on video, you have the pleasure to see the folks who are on that vegan line, and they looked. And I don't like to comment on people's public look, personal look, unless it's Tish James or one of those folks. But you look at the folks eating the vegan line, and they look exactly like you think they would look. So if you folks who are listening on audio only, you can imagine what they look like, fellows with long hair, men with long hair, women with red hair.
I want to say something good about Baku and Azerbaijan. The food was incredible. I love meat, and they served up all kinds of excellent meat and meat dishes. And I got to say, it reminded me of 1960s United States, 1970s. I'm a cigar and pipe smoker, tobacco pipe, and I could smoke anywhere in this country. We had cab drivers smoking. I could smoke in the restaurant. I was smoking in my hotel room. Every room in my hotel in Baku was a smoking room. We were informed by Expedia when I booked it. They didn't have non-smoking rooms. So I haven't smoked in bed in 30 years. It was an incredible experience. It was a throwback to a simpler time. In fact, I did a Newsmax TV interview smoking my pipe in the restaurant live. I had a lot of fun with that. That was just unusual, but a little throwback there. It was kind of an interesting cultural experience for me.
Well, it's good that you had some fun at their expense, and everything we do is at their expense because these people, Mark, are total idiots. Marc Morano, the website is climatedepot.com. We could probably talk here for another 2 hours or so. I'm on a different time zone than you right now.
Yes, you're in Marrakesh. Well, good night.
Well, I'll let you go, and I'll go off and get some rest. Marc Morano, come back soon. There's so much more to talk about, and I think there are better days ahead, Mark.
I hope so. I think you're right. Thanks a lot, John. Appreciate it.
God bless you, Mark.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks again to Marc Morano, climatedepot.com, folks. Great website. You go there, get all your climate change news if you feel so inclined to do so. Folks, I hope you all have a great Thanksgiving. We'll have no show tomorrow. We may have a midday update for you if there's any breaking news. We'll see you back here Friday for the Great America Show, where our quest for truth, justice, and the American way continues. Folks, I'll see you on Friday. Once again, I hope you all have a happy and healthy Thanksgiving with your family and loved ones. Until next time, until Friday, May God bless you. May God bless America. And may God bless the great Lou Dobbs.